Hey, sorry it took me so long.
It's okay.
I had a bunch of last minute stuff. It took me longer than I thought to get it all done.
You guys been busy?
Oh, you don't even know. We've been swamped. Have you been here before?
No, I'm excited to try it though.
I know, I've heard it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I forgot to send some financial documents. Our company's doing an acquisition.
Really?
I'm sorry. Is there Wi-Fi here?
Yeah, I think it's called guest.
Oh, great. There's not even a password.
Don't you need a VPN?
No, just Wi-Fi. And we're set.
Great.
Let's go.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Series. I am so glad you joined us today. Before we get started, I just have to ask, did you see that guy in the restaurant? Not the one capturing all the Wi-Fi traffic. The other guy, Mr. I don't need VPN because the free Wi-Fi doesn't even require a password. Sir, if you're out there, we need to talk. I hope you watch this whole episode and think about what you've done. Then when you're good and ready, we've still got a lot to talk about. Speaking of a lot to talk about, we've got a great episode planned for today. We called it Risky Business. We called it Risky Business because whenever we're doing anything online, we're exposing ourselves to risks. Risks like network compromise, stolen credentials, leaked data, or any number of bad things that could happen. Throughout today's episode, we'll talk about what we can do to manage that risk. Before we jump into it, let's talk about where we're headed today. We'll start by hearing about the interesting work that our guest and his company do. We'll have a short learning segment about how threats and vulnerabilities line up against each other to determine overall risk. Then we'll go a little deeper into some of today's cyber threats, followed by some great career advice. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with a live Q&A segment. So please start entering your questions in the chat. We'll monitor your questions throughout the episode. Whatever we don't answer along the way, we'll address it at the end. With that, let's introduce today's guest, Chris Abbey. In Denver, Colorado. He's worked in information assurance and cybersecurity for the past 20 years. He served in the United States Air Force and has worked in several great positions in the public and private sectors. We're thrilled to have him here with us today. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So Chris, let's start out talking a little bit about this amazing career of yours.
Sure, yes.
You started back in 2003 in the United States Air Force, and from there have moved through several different positions. Tell us about some of them.
Yeah, so right out of high school, went into the Air Force looking for a career in IT, and then basically found it as soon as I went to. My first duty station was in Seoul, South Korea, and got to serve on weapon systems and all this wide spectrum of IT equipment. So my world was wide open. Moving out of the military and transitioning into private, I actually did some federal contract work and then did some public work as well in the federal space and even state and local. Really cut my teeth in state and local and moved into a private work with Red Canary. And so I've been loving my career since.
Sounds like really exciting stuff that you did, and it seems like there's been a little bit of an evolution to that, starting kind of with administrative duties, and then really evolving, mastering that, and evolving into some of the security aspects. Which at the end of this, we're going to get some career advice from you. So now you're a product integration manager at Red Canary. Can you help us understand what you do there?
Sure. That's something I ask myself every day because it seems like our team operates like a startup within a startup. So we work with great technology partners, and we try to figure out how to get all that juicy data from those products like endpoint detection response, intrusion detection systems, into an engine that really serves our end user and customer, kind of reduce the noise in their security stack.
Yeah, great. I think you gave me a little bit of the answer to this question already, but can you expound on what Red Canary does? What's the mission there?
Sure. So Red Canary is a managed detection and response service. So what we do is we sit on top of maybe a customer's technology stack, and we provide kind of a more kind of consolidated detection quality. We improve detection quality. We apply people, processes, and technology together to kind of serve some of these underutilized resource teams, some teams that are focused on maybe new and novel threats to their organization. And what we do is we try to reduce the noise, but increase the quality of detection qualities.
That's a great mission. I'm sure you're helping a lot of clients.
We hope
out
so,
there.
yes, definitely.
Yeah. I have to ask before we move on, Red Canary, is there a story behind it?
So our founders like to tell the story, and I probably won't do it justice, but a lot of it came through during a VC conversation, a venture capitalist conversation. And so what happened was the team kind of wanted to kind of elicit this idea of the canary in the coal mine. And so they were quickly looking on clip art and everything else, and then found a picture of a finch, put a box around it, put a little line through it as the branch, and therefore we are now known as Red Canary. So really we try to serve as that like canary in the coal mine, and alerting, if you're familiar with the story, alerting the miners that there's something bad in the environment. So we continue that to this day.
It's a great analogy, and looks like the clip art has served the company well for a long time now.
Years of clip art use.
That's awesome. So back to your kind of career progression. You progressed from managing and administering IT roles through all of these different public and private sector jobs, kind of some consulting type things, some internal type things. Is there kind of a common thread that runs through all of that you would kind of identify with?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really just still attuned to back from the military days as well as service. We're always providing some sort of service to an internal or external stakeholder, customer. And so one thing, even from IT management, you're serving the availability for a customer in terms of how often their servers are up and what they're doing. Cybersecurity, you talk about the CIA triad, or the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We're always trying to serve and kind of balance that out for the business. And so in Red Canary, working on the product integration piece is, being able to serve telemetry, to our, our internal systems, but also really quality detections to our customers and externally.
That's great. I love your reference to the CIA triad. So often we talk to cybersecurity professionals and people, say, so what do you do? And, oh, well, we protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or ensure those things are present. And yes, but I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that our business really is helping make sure that the business is successful. Yeah. And we do it through the CIA triad.
Yeah. Anytime we can throw away around 3-letter acronyms, it makes us feel much better.
I guess so. Yeah. You're probably right there. So in one of your previous roles, you were a cybersecurity analyst working with both the threat side and the vulnerability side. And I think that's a great segue into today's learning segment. Why don't we take a minute and watch it together?
When people talk about cybersecurity, we often hear words like threat, vulnerability, and risk, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. Let's explore what each of these terms means, how they relate to each other, and how understanding them can help us be more secure. Let's start with threats. Cybersecurity threats come in all shapes and sizes. Natural threats, like fires and floods, environmental threats, like power surges or blackouts, and there are all kinds of malicious, intentional threats that are broadly characterized as hacking, or any technique that leads to the compromise of a computer device or network. In summary, Threats are all the bad things that can negatively affect your network or individual computer devices. Now, what about vulnerabilities? Vulnerabilities are the weaknesses that threats can exploit. Generally speaking, a threat is only dangerous to us if we have a corresponding vulnerability that is susceptible to that threat. Cybersecurity professionals need to have a good understanding of both the threats they face as well as the vulnerabilities that exist in their network environment. To understand these, they conduct detailed threat and vulnerability assessments. The end goal of all of this is to reduce our risk of compromise. From a business standpoint, a complete risk calculation would also include factors such as likelihood and impact. Today, we're just going to focus on threats and vulnerabilities. You can think of your network like the popular game Battleship. Threats would be like your friend who was trying to sink your ships by calling out different coordinates. B7, hit! Vulnerabilities would be like the ships that you placed around your board. If you remember, some were larger than others, and the larger ones were always easier to find and sink. So, how do we reduce risk? Let's say your business is located in an area prone to floods. There's nothing you can do to eliminate heavy rain or storms, so the threat of flooding won't change. But you can reduce your vulnerability to the threat of flooding by moving your computer servers from the basement to a higher floor. And you can eliminate your vulnerability to flooding altogether by moving your servers to a cloud environment. Like trying to control the weather, there's not much you can do to reduce the threat of malicious cyber attacks. Luckily, you can reduce or eliminate your vulnerability to those risks, thus lowering your overall risk of compromise. Miss.
That was a great segment. If only all of our threats were as easy to manage as moving the servers from the basement up to a higher floor. But that's the world we live in, and that's why guys like you have great jobs.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about, in terms of the fact that there are threats out there. We really, like they said, can't do a whole lot about the weather. We can't do a whole lot about a lot of those threats that exist, but we can manage the vulnerability to those threats and reduce our overall risk to them. So it seems like the threat that we've heard the most about, if we look in the media, especially since the high-profile attacks last year on Colonial Pipeline or the JBS meatpacking attack, and that's ransomware. And it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. If anything, it seems like it's growing as a threat. So as we consider ransomware as the threat, what do you think are the vulnerabilities that we should be focusing on to reduce our risk to the ransomware threat?
Yeah, so a lot of the vulnerabilities that we typically see within an organization or enterprise is just kind of lack of an awareness of what they have out there in the internet. Oftentimes we grow and expand our corporate networks, and we do POCs or points, our proof of concepts of different softwares, but we also oftentimes don't track those systems that are out there. So what we are doing is creating new footholds for attackers to kind of leverage and platform off of in terms of those silent attacks. Oftentimes they're on your network already, and they're doing whatever they're doing on maybe unprotected systems. Other things like vulnerability management, like things like being aware of maybe CISA. CISA does a really great job in terms of what vulnerabilities are out there. The National Vulnerability Database constantly is a flood of new vulnerabilities that are out there. And so understanding what software is running and the vulnerabilities that are associated to it. And then compromised passwords are another big giant vulnerability that we often see, especially like in the Colonial Pipeline attack. We see compromised passwords being used and leveraged in order to kind of laterally move and gain a maybe administrative foothold within an environment. So oftentimes just patch management and vulnerability management and credential management and all this fun management topics and stuff like that is usually come to play in terms of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, great. That's great insight. It seems like sometimes I talk to someone like you with long career in information assurance, and you've seen practically everything by this point in your career. And then people say, oh, Chris, man, you see it all. So what should we be doing? And they expect this technical answer, and it ends up being, hey, it's the same old stuff that you've been hearing for almost 20 years. Good passwords, keep your systems up to date, turn on automatic updates, whatever it is, and that eliminates the vast majority of all these attacks.
Yeah, a lot of what we do in cybersecurity is resiliency. And so like one of the big things I like to say is we can never make a system secure. All we can do is make it more resilient to cyber attacks. And so oftentimes what we're doing as cybersecurity analysts and engineers and architects is really just kind of figuring out ways to make systems more resilient, companies more resilient, or even people more resilient to cyber attack.
Yeah, great. And to go with the theme of the video that we just watched, all of that is shrinking our vulnerabilities. Something else we're hearing a lot about in the news, especially with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, is advanced persistent threats, especially these days talking about those emanating from Russia. Advanced persistent threat, or APT as the industry knows them. Those groups are associated with several different countries, but like I hear these days, we hear a lot more about the Russian groups. When I think about advanced persistent threats, I go back to my old days as an FBI agent, and I think of, ransomware is kind of a smash and grab crime scene type thing, where if our network were a home, a ransomware attack would look something like a muddy rock thrown through the sliding door, and there's broken glass everywhere, and some fingerprints left behind, maybe some muddy footprints all the way to the jewelry box, and a couple of pairs of earrings and who knows what, heading back to the broken door, and maybe some rubber tire tracks leaving the neighborhood. If that's ransomware, advanced persistent threats, again with the crime scene analogy, is we come home and nothing looks different. It looks just the way it was when we left, and yet somebody's been in our home and has established a foothold, and they're trying to stay there. So again, when we say, well, the APTs, if that's the threat, what vulnerabilities do you think they are exploiting to be able to carry out these attacks?
Well, the good thing is, I think a lot of groups and a lot of organizations and industries use the APT as the boogeyman. So when you think APT, it's just someone who has more money and budget and more time, pointed it towards attacking your organization than you have as a defensive person. And so oftentimes, the vulnerabilities we see associated to it, it was just what we talked about before. It's not understanding your environment, not understanding what you're protecting, not understanding what credentials and endpoints are out there on the network, not training your users and protecting your users and training them to be kind of those human sensors in your environment. And so oftentimes we see APTs, they're just like any other attacker. They're using the same credentials, they're using the same, forum databases, they're using the same bits of information, commercial software, even scripts that, some of the commodity type malware and teams that we're using today. So, a lot of times they are using these lazy methods because it still works.
It works, yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting because, again, when we talk about the vulnerability side of things, fixing a vulnerability or a subset of vulnerabilities really can protect us against all kinds of threats. And sure, if the front door is left open, well, smash and grab bad guys are going to use it. Yeah. The sneaky bad guys are going to use it. I guess what distinguishes them is what they do after they get in there. Yeah. And that makes me wonder, you did some work as an incident handler. For those not in the industry, incident handlers, an incident is, holy cow, something bad happened to our network. Let's call in the incident handlers to fix it. And what kind of tracks do you look for, say, for an APT to discover those?
Well, oftentimes, so especially with Red Canary and what our engine provides and stuff like that, we have a really great stockpile of tactics and techniques that attackers are using across industries, across verticals, and within small, medium businesses, all the way up to these large enterprise organizations. And so oftentimes we build that body of evidence, those indicators of compromise, and basically are able to apply them and look at the behaviors that we're seeing across an environment. So I like your analogy in terms of the ransomware, smash and grab type thing, but sometimes we do see footprints and there is these indicators that, someone has been in here, someone has, made a home in our environment and are constantly poking and pulling. Other things too is we're seeing, especially with ransomware, the evolution of ransomware in terms of holding your data hostage, but also sharing your data if you don't.
Sure.
Leveraging kind of public perception and public interest to kind of force maybe someone to pay out or pay for that credential key.
Yeah, great. Before we move on to the next segment, I just want to ask, what do you see kind of over the horizon, or what are the threats that we haven't talked about that we still need to be looking out for?
Yeah, I like to tackle it in 2 different ways. Like the private, like something that I'm worried about for my family and my friends is like scams and phishing are still a prevalent way of attacking. They tackle the human element of security where, I want to elicit something from you, I want you to give me something, or I want to take something from you.
And they lead to the front door unlocking.
Correct.
For all kinds of other bad stuff to come in.
You never know. I mean, it could be a quick play for money, or it could be a quick play for credentials and access, even to your corporate environment. For corporate environments, it's maintaining that supply chain. Like we've heard a lot of things about like SolarWinds and Kaseya and stuff like that, and being able to attack managed service providers, which provide hundreds of customers maybe a security service or an IT service. We see folks, those organizations get targeted. We see the software they're using getting targeted as well. So I think for the biggest thing for that is just making sure that software inventory is huge and important, and understanding what your applications are doing in your environment and how they serve your customers.
Yeah, that leads to the monitoring aspect of, I know back in my day of seeing a fair number of companies have fairly significant compromises, and how they detected those was often aided by proper network segmentation, or as people call it, defense in layers.
Yes.
or defense in depth, I guess is. And that being able to identify anomalous behavior as it traverses your network helps you. I was thinking of my crime scene example, and I'm like, you're right, it's not the broken window, but maybe you need to check under the bed, or that dark spot in the closet that nobody ever wants to go to. So.
And the great thing, there's organizations like MITRE who are coming up with this attack matrix. And so what that is basically, it steps you through that whole process of, what does an attacker do when they want to find out more about your information or your organization? What do they do in reconnaissance, information gathering? How do they penetrate your networks too? So there's a lot of really great bodies of evidence that are building, especially when we start talking about these advanced threats or these ransomwares or intrusion.
Yeah, great. So Chris, we have some sage tips that we're going to share. We're here at Western Governors University. For those of you who don't know, our mascot is Sage the Night Owl. And Sage, of course, not only is the mascot's name, but represents the wisdom that the mascot has for us. And so today we're going to share a couple of Sage tips. Let's roll that reel.
Welcome to Sage Tips to minimize vulnerabilities to threats. You should employ these best practices. DIY. Enable automatic updates. This will help minimize vulnerability in your system and applications. Expert mode. Implement network segmentation. Tune in for more Sage tips in future episodes.
Great tips. Thanks, Sage. Sage actually looks pretty cool in that video. So let's talk a little bit about some career advice now. We know that you started your cybersecurity career, or really your IT career that led into a cybersecurity career in the Air Force. We very likely have some women and men who are serving in our armed forces. We're grateful for your service, by the way. They may be looking to transition out, sorry, I knew it was a T word.
There you go.
Transition out of the military with the experience that they have already working in security. What advice would you have for them?
I think the biggest thing for especially transitioning military folks is really just understanding what you're providing to the military. I think a lot of folks who I've spoken to about like transitioning out and targeting maybe an IT or cybersecurity career field really sit there and they don't really recognize the value that they brought to the military, and how much those skills, that knowledge, and that management prowess that they've built over maybe a 3, 4, 5, 6 year career really brings to a business. They're light years ahead of some folks who are just coming straight from the streets or college, and so just recognizing what you bring to the table is a fantastic way. Networking as well. I don't when I talk about networking, I mean like meeting at social events and
not cables and routers.
Not cables and routers. I know it's hard to like break out of that shell, But like, as you're pursuing careers, look for professional organizations, because networking for the sake of networking is just boring and tedious. But networking to understand like what is my community need, what are businesses asking for, is a huge way to kind of improve your visibility, and a huge way to improve how you apply your experience and stuff like that to especially those resumes that are so hard to like break through some of those systems.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I would just say to echo that, don't sell that experience short. There's some incredible experience gained in the military that is just, well, it's just what I do. But when you transition to the private sector, you realize, oh, wow, that's fantastic experience that I have. So you started your career kind of IT administration type work and evolved into cybersecurity. Is that the route that all cyber professionals need to take, or is it fair to say that someone could start just in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'm really split on that, because I do feel like there is a lot of value gained from like operating on a help desk or serving a customer set or a business as a system administrator. You gain a lot of really great knowledge about how systems interact, how networks interact, and how customers are using and leveraging systems. But like I've met so many people in my career now who are psych majors or English majors who have this creative aspect and where they can apply different ways of managing systems, people, being able to look at from an attacker's perspective or even a defender's perspective, leveraging kind of that broad spectrum. So the range that are coming on some folks who are outside of our industry is immense and highly needed in our career field.
Yeah, I think sometimes somebody with a background like yours, which is fantastic, because that fundamental understanding of the bits and the bytes and the OSI model and how traffic traverses through a network is absolutely essential. But the creativity sometimes through that formal training isn't maybe there, and people coming from a different point of view really do add some necessary diversity into the profession.
And there was a reason why security was always kind of the department of no, is because we all operate from a standpoint of, we know how these systems work, we know how they should work and how they shouldn't work, and so no, you can't have that. And so we're seeing kind of that change and shift to business, as you mentioned, is we're serving and protecting business and trying to make it more resilient. So having that diverse viewpoint is huge in our industry now.
Yeah, awesome. So last question on career advice, and then we got to get to a few questions.
Perfect.
You've done some really cool stuff, some of the threat analysis and incident handling. You work with threat hunters and engineers, all of the stereotypical, really cool stuff that they make movies about, people in cybersecurity. Are there other opportunities that are outside of the stereotypical roles that people should also be considering, because they are also vital to the success of security in an organization? Yeah,
I would say anyone who's looking, don't necessarily not look at those like marketing roles. If you have a marketing background, we need people marketing cybersecurity skill sets, education, it's training users on how to leverage systems and securely. I came in through Red Canary as a customer success manager, which is more of that service and customer support. Being able to kind of position and platform off of these roles in companies that maybe serve customers for cybersecurity is a great way. But yeah, we need more diverse candidates. We need more people who have that creativity side and stuff like that. And so exploring some of those spaces like product marketing management, security management, or security marketing as well is a huge way in.
Yeah, great. So many jobs. If you think you're interested, but you don't necessarily want to be a pen tester, so many jobs available in cybersecurity. We need you. All right, let's go to some questions. We've got a few of them popping up on the screen here. I think there's a great one there, which is how do you get a company that thinks they're too small to be a target to invest or care about cybersecurity? That is really an erroneous notion that, nobody will hack us or nobody will ransomware us because we're too small. You've seen it. It's all sizes, isn't it?
I think if you look cybersecurity on Google or Google News and stuff like that, I think you'll see a variety of small, medium-sized businesses that are going under because print shops, and I came from Denver. There's a print shop in Denver that had to close their doors because of a ransomware event. These ransomware actors are asking for a lot of money, which could potentially disrupt your business pretty
Yeah.
significantly.
Yeah. And we obviously don't like to employ scare tactics to get the boss to sign off on a new whatever we need, some security investment. But I do think that focus going back to what is the primary purpose we're doing cybersecurity is to help the business be successful, and perhaps doing a little bit of a return on investment calculation for the decision makers that, hey, it's going to cost us this much, but let's talk about if we don't have this protection in place, how catastrophic that might be to our overall business.
And that first segment you played was a really great way of kind of figuring out what that balance needs to be. And so you can certainly do cybersecurity on a budget, but you are giving and taking in terms of what makes sense for what you're protecting. You certainly don't want to pay more than what you're protecting is worth.
Yeah.
But being able to kind of balance it out with the business is a huge thing too.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned before too, threat analysis and vulnerability analysis, and if you're a print shop, well, what threats are you worried about?
Mm-hmm.
You're not, say, a major airline that exists by people making reservations thousands per second.
Yep.
But so your threat is going to look different from that, but the threats are still there,
Yeah.
and then figure out how to fix the vulnerabilities. There's another question there about might be relevant to your background, which is if you're not already in the military, there are a lot of jobs available with government contractors, and several of those require security clearances. And so I guess that's one potential advantage to those who are transitioning from the military, is their clearance is likely in place already.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people looking to get those jobs. I guess I'll vet against your opinion, what my opinion is, and that is those companies do have functions in place to help people get their security clearance, but you got to keep your nose clean. So
Yes.
You can't go in and expect a security clearance if you've got some skeletons in your closet.
Yeah, and the good thing is, like, you see a lot of those more DoD and DOI and DOJ contractors out there. They're all actually offering job events, job fairs. So I would say seek out whatever contractor that you are interested in, and see what their paths are in. Because a lot of times they are signing people into security clearances, and like you said, if you keep your nose clean, there's definitely a place for you. It may be a little bit more difficult than it is for veterans with pre-existing, but there is paths in.
Yeah, great. Let's take one last question. I see a great one here, which is someone who has a marketing degree, and they're looking to get into cybersecurity, and they say a little tough maybe to get into the field without any experience. Can you give any ideas on, either from your own background or tips you've heard on how do we gain some experience to help get us into those interviews?
Yeah. Well, especially if you are a marketing major and have that background too. I mean, looking at any of the cybersecurity company that's out there, we're all marketing, we're all selling, even those internally. Those skill sets of being able to tell a concise story and being able to deliver kind of the not bury the lead and deliver why we're doing some of the things are a huge skill set. And so being able to apply, especially in a resume or in an interview, apply that knowledge and that expertise to what the job is asking for. I think you can target most entry-level cybersecurity jobs with a good foundational knowledge. So read up on terms of what the product is or what they're protecting, and then doing some basic homework in terms of how do you apply a cybersecurity mindset to whatever I'm doing. But I think breaking that whole mold, I know it's difficult to hunt for jobs and dig into jobs and stuff like that. So being able to sell the expertise and skills that you bring to the table and align it to what that company or organization is trying to do is huge. So I think if you're a marketing major, go look at marketing jobs around cybersecurity companies. You'll learn a ton.
Yeah, and maybe that, if you're interested in the technical side of it, maybe that's the foothold, is you start with marketing because that's what your background is, but market for a cybersecurity firm, and then you can develop some of that security expertise on the side. And nothing wrong with building your own home network. And Raspberry Pis are super cheap. You can build all kinds of things with virtual machines and run some tools and some techniques yourself at home. Don't hack your neighbors, but do some things at home. And that's all valuable experience when you go in for those job interviews. Well, listen, I think we could go for hours because I know you have great stories from your background, but Really appreciate you being here with us today, Chris. Our first ever guest on our first ever episode of the cybersecurity series. So really appreciate you being here with us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's been sunny here in Salt Lake City, so I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. We ordered the weather just
Thank
for
you.
you.
I appreciate it.
And we look forward to having our next episode on June 30th. That episode, we will talk about identity and access management, or what in the business we refer to as IAM. And with that in mind, you'll know why the title is I Am Who I Am, Unless I'm Not. We'll talk to another industry expert with some really cool stories about her or his job. We'll talk about passwords, about multi-factor authentication, and a lot of other great tips on how to secure our networks from bad people getting in and doing bad things. With that, we'll sign off for today, and we'll see you next time on the Cybersecurity Series.